Set? Okay. I'll turn my mic on and we can get going. Well, good morning. It is 9:15, and so we're going to get started. We have a lot to cover today. I've asked Elisa Case to join me and to be part of our conversation this morning. This isn't too loud, is it? Are we okay? Okay. We're going to talk about a trip that we took with teachers from Ohio to Poland this last summer. I'll explain that in all in just a minute. But to sort of set the stage for us and to review a little bit about what we've been talking about, we're talking about Christians in a postmodern America. And as I've been saying probably over and over and over again, one of probably the distinctive feature of postmodernism is the fact that there is no true or right narrative, no meta-narrative, as they put it. There are just competing narratives. And I want to emphasize once again, I am not a postmodern. I do not agree with postmodernism. But I think there is, as a matter of fact, a right narrative, an absolute narrative, that is to say a narrative that's true for everybody, whether or not they recognize it to be true or not. The question of whether or not we can know that narrative, that's a whole other matter. We may not be able to know it. In fact, we may never be able to know that we have the right narrative, but the belief is that there is a right narrative. In fact, I would argue some of the most dangerous people out there are those who think they have the truth. And they will tell you what God wants you to believe and how God wants you to live and what God wants you to do. So that's a very dangerous, I think, approach to the truth. and perhaps part of the problem with the postmodern approach is that we can then dictate what the truth is because we create the narrative in postmodernism. And the other dangerous part, I think, about postmodernism is that whoever controls the narrative holds the power. And that's, I think, the really dangerous part of this sort of postmodern understanding or approach to things. It's time to lift the veil here about what we've been talking about. What I've been indicating is that currently in our country, there is a narrative that has been pushed out there. And this particular narrative blames our country's problems on a particular subgroup. And according to this narrative, if we were to detain and deport these people, Americans' problems will go away. We will become great again, according to this particular narrative. And it's a very seductive story because it offers a clear and simple solution to our problems. And if you think back to our conversation about belief formation, our beliefs get formed not always on what's rational or logical. They're often formed by what is emotionally comforting to us. And for many, they choose to believe because it's emotionally comforting to them. What we want to talk about today is the fact that this narrative has been around for a while. That in point of fact, the Nazis used this very same narrative to vilify, demonize, and ultimately exterminate the Jews of Europe. And so we want to talk some about this journey that we took, which looks specifically at the matter of the Holocaust in Poland. Before we begin that, one more thing I'd like to say about genocide. The Holocaust was a genocide, and Genocide is never just about numbers. We always think about the number of people killed, and the number of people killed, of course, was overwhelming, I'll say that. But genocide is about erasing a people. It is an attempt to eliminate and take their history, their culture, their beliefs, their progeny, and of course their property and possessions. That's all part of the genocidal process. And as we talk about our experiences in Poland, we're going to talk about some of those kinds of things. The relationship here, so you know, is that we have a very similar narrative that's being propagated today here. And we want to sort of talk about where this kind of thing can lead. I'm going to turn it over to Elisa here and let her get started, and then we'll... And
this, I just push.
You push that one right there.
This one?
Yep.
And this is working?
It seems to be.
Good. So we got to go on this tour. Yeah. To Poland, and our group went to Krakow. Is not on? But I gotta hold it. We went to Krakow, and we went with a group called the Ohio Holocaust Genocide Memorial and Education Commission, of which Brad is a commissioner. It's a 15-person board appointed by the governor, put together a few years back in 2020, and their goal is to provide and to promote education of Holocaust and genocide, teachers for sure, but to all Ohio citizens. And so they do this through seminars and conferences and workshops. I've been to a couple that have been held in Columbus and have been just absolutely phenomenal in terms of who they have in to speak and the resources they provide. But they're all across Ohio, so really pretty important board. They also came up with a trip that we could apply to go to Krakow and to be able to study microhistory of a trip. So we had 2 commissioners with us on the trip, Brad and someone else, and then we had 10 or 11 teachers from across Ohio. Some were middle school teachers, but most of us were high school teachers.
I should point out that Jody is actually not a commissioner, but she does work for the commission.
She's in the light green shirt.
That's right.
Always
She's in the middle there.
In the middle of everything.
Yes, always.
Definite personality. I teach at Lake High School, and I teach a couple of freshman English classes and a couple of junior, senior AP European history classes. But then I teach a semester class, fall and spring, of a class called Holocaust Studies. And I usually take a group out to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., overnight trip. But because Brad encouraged me the year before last, I applied for and was able to get funds towards helping my students go overnight trip to Cincinnati, to the Holocaust and Humanity Center in Cincinnati, where we have a trip planned in the imminent future. And I just want to encourage you, it's an amazing center for study, and it is worth your trip to Cincinnati if you can't go with the church in upcoming times.
I'm going to interrupt again. The trip there to the Auschwitz exhibit, which our church is going to take a bus down, is at the Cincinnati Museum Center, which is where the Holocaust and Humanities Center is located. So if you go, I would encourage you to make sure to visit the Holocaust and Humanities Center in the basement of the building. And it is just a gorgeous, gorgeous building. If you've never been to the Cincinnati Museum Center, it's the old train station where many of the refugees from the Holocaust came when they came to Ohio. It's just a beautiful building. And I would encourage you to go, and when you're there, stop and see the Humanities Center. I'm sorry.
It's very thoughtfully done, and it's centered around those people that came in through the Cincinnati Center right there.
Right, the train.
So it's very locally, in terms of our state, done. So we took off for Krakow, and we were led by a group called Yahad and Unum, which Brad reminded me that Yahad is Hebrew for together, and the in Unum is a Latin phrase for in one. And their mission is to inform and to commemorate a part of the Holocaust a lot of people don't know about or think about. I think when we think about the Holocaust, we usually think about what the Nazis termed the final solution, and that was setting up those 6 death camps in Poland for mass extermination of people through gas chambers and crematorium. But for the year and a half before that final solution, the Nazis were using a system called Einsatzgruppen, where they would take mobile killing squads, Nazis, into villages and rural areas and round up Jews and have mass trenches and just shoot people into those mass graves. And so this organization is started by a French priest, Father Patrick Dubois, and it's an interesting story Brad reminded me about. He actually was, and this is Father Dubois in the early 2000s, he was making a trip to the Poland-Ukraine border, Ruska, I think that's how you say it. Ravoruska. And he is going there because his grandfather fought as a French soldier in World War II and was deported to a Nazi camp. And so he was going to discover part of his own heritage of having a grandfather at that camp when he is stunned and overwhelmed by people there talking about how many mass killing centers there were in and around that area, and most of them unmarked and untalked of for 60 years. And so he then is going to put together a series of books, the first of which is called Holocaust by Bullets. And in our academic preparation to get ready for the trip, we all read this book, and it is a horrifying account of how this Einsatzgruppen was carried out, but hauntingly similar from village to village to village. And it was about this time that Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was the most famous with the highest level platform for being a Holocaust denier or Holocaust distortionist as president of Iran. And so really Father Dubois wanted to provide evidence that there was a single truth, that we could not deny this, that should not be the narrative. And so he resolved and has committed his life work now to going around and finding evidence for and commemorating these mass sites. And he started in the Ukraine, and even there found over 2,500, I think they're up to now, killing sites just in Ukraine. So he actually has put together quite a website that you can go to, and there's a map of Europe with all of these sites that they know about, archival evidence, if you go to one of those red dots, as well as oftentimes testimony. And that is how Yahad and Unum works primarily. He would take in a team of 10 or 11, and there would be translators, and there would be cameramen and videographers, and go into a town or a village and try to find the oldest people there and say, were you here when the war was fought? Were you living here? And of course, if they were, he would ask if he could ask them questions. Oftentimes they might not be, but they could point, oh, my neighbor 3 houses down, they were here, they talked about that. And so then he would go to that person, and actually he said almost without exception, those witnesses who were not Jewish wanted to be able to tell what had happened in their village or their town. Almost felt like they were giving a deputation. Some of them said, I'm so glad to talk about this before I pass away. And so through all of those testimonies, you can start to say, well, I think it was in this field, or I think it was this part of the woods. And then he would take in one of the 10 or 11 was a ballistics forensics expert. And they could start, I remember one of his early sites that he's uncovered had over 5,000 casings of bullets, that they could find these casings. And amazingly enough, inside the casing was where it had been produced in Germany and the date. So it was quite strong forensic evidence, so that you can tell the world there weren't any Soviet bullets here. It wasn't a war, it wasn't a battle, it was a genocidal action. So he's got all kinds of archival evidence, and then he's got these bullet casings, and he's got the interviews, and it's really quite the work. His whole premise is that he really doesn't want to have a modern Europe built on a denial of the past. He wants that truth because he also believes in a truth to be known if we're going to carry on in this way.
Thanks. I would, if you're interested at all, the Holocaust by Bullet it's a difficult read, but it's a very powerful read. And as Elisa was saying, they're very careful in collecting their evidence to establish the veracity of these claims of Holocaust by bullets. Mainly in Ukraine. He was working mainly in Ukraine, but as you could see from the interactive map there, if we go back, there we go. I'm not sure what's happening here. There we go. You can see that there are just sites everywhere. The blue ones are not yet active, but you can hone in on any of these sites, and there will be testimony from people. They were clearly relieved to be able to tell their story and traumatized by what they experienced, sometimes 70 years ago, 80 years ago, but just relieved to be able to express these ideas and these thoughts with someone. And as she was pointing out, when we were in Krakow, we were working with Yahad and Unum, and they were showing us how they did this. And we met with several witnesses who experienced what the Nazis did in these villages in southern Poland. Krakow it's actually pronounced Krakow. A W is a V in Polish. Sorry, I got distracted. What was I saying? In these villages, these people, of course, now are very, very old, but they experienced what happened when the Germans came and engaged in their genocidal activity. We stayed in a hotel called the Golden Tulip, and it was in an area of Krakow called Kazimierz, which was the Jewish district. One of the interesting things to me, which I didn't know until I got ready for this particular trip, was that Poland was very accommodating to Jews, which is why there were so many Jews who lived in Poland. I can't remember exactly the number of Jews living in Poland. That is, there's a certain percentage of Jews living in Poland, but the reason they were is because the kings of Poland were willing to accommodate them and let them sort of live their lives. Of course, they couldn't live in Krakow. They had to live outside of Krakow, but they were nevertheless able to live there, and they could flourish there. And so many, many Jews chose to live in Poland, and why there were so many deaths there in Poland. Our first day, we looked at the Kazimierz district there. There was a lot of interesting stories. One of the stories that sort of stuck with me was we visited a former synagogue that was there, and after the war, a young boy apparently came into the synagogue out of curiosity, and then went running out and said that they were trying to kidnap him and they wanted to drink his blood, which was one of the stories that was told about the Jews. And people got upset. They attacked the people that were there in the synagogue. They killed a woman named Risa Berger, who had survived Auschwitz, survived the war, and then was killed after the war because of this false narrative that was used to justify the killing of the Jews. Another interesting story, Roman Polanski was the famous film director, was also a part of the ghetto, Jewish ghetto there in Krakow. And one of the things that we visited was an area called the Heroes of the Ghetto Square. It's now a memorial. This square was in the center of the Jewish ghetto. This was actually across the river, the Vistula River. You'll notice the chairs here. There are 70 chairs in the square, and they represent the 7,000 people who were detained in the ghetto at Krakow. And the significance of the chairs is to remind us that these people were forced to live inside this ghetto. The Jews were forced to live in the ghetto. On the right side of this building, right over here, there's a pharmacy. And during the war, the one non-Jewish person who was allowed to stay in the ghetto was the pharmacist who ran this pharmacy here. And he was able to actually protect many of the Jews. He was able to protect a lot of their scrolls, the Torah scrolls, etc. He kept in this pharmacy an attempt to protect their history. And again, keep in mind that genocide is about not just killing people, but taking away who they are, taking away their history, their culture, their past, and of course their future as well. And so he was trying to do what he could to protect those who were living in the ghetto, the Jewish ghetto. Two of the chairs here, they all face the same way. If you're in the square, they're all facing in the same direction, except for two of them. One of them is facing towards Oskar Schindler's factory, where Jews were protected by Oskar Schindler. I'm sure you're familiar with Schindler's List, the movie, which was filmed here in Krakow and has a lot to do with, a lot of what we saw was connected to what was portrayed in the film because of the history there. So one chair faces towards the Schindler factory, one chair faces towards a side street where a mass killing took place by the Nazis, and in commemoration or to remind people that took place. But otherwise, they're all facing in the same direction. Was there anything that you recall from this that you want to add?
There's a book.
Use the
mic. Oh, sorry. There's a book we were able to get.
Yes.
The Krakow Pharmacy.
Yep, the Krakow Pharmacy.
Yeah, and he writes it as kind of a daily what happened. It was really very enlightening. Yeah, we both read it after the trip. The other thing we have here is some remnants of the walls that were built around the ghetto or still exist. This is part of the wall that was constructed to keep the Jews within the ghetto. What's striking here is this is found in a children's playground, and it's part of the wall that exists. Here's another picture. This was one of the streets. There's very little of the wall that still exists, but this is another part of the wall, once again on the street in the city of Krakow. That same day, we walked by and identified the Jewish Community Center, which is in Krakow, and I insisted that we include this slide. I told Lisa we're going to put that slide in.
Later in the week, on Friday, we would come back and meet with the director, who was an American from New York City, and now is the director of the Jewish Community Center here in Krakow. And we shared Shabbat dinner with about 200 of our intimate friends there in Krakow. In fact, some of the people in our group knew and were friends with some of the people who were sharing Shabbat dinner there. The other interesting thing about this photo is you'll see these people queued up in front of the Jewish Center. Those are Ukrainian refugees who are there seeking help. The Ukraine war, of course, has created a massive number of refugees. And they were there, and the Jewish Center is providing food, clothing, assistance to the refugees from Ukraine who are struggling because of war. Anything else there? Okay, just hop in anytime. One day we went to a village south of Krakow called Rabka Zodri, and we met with a witness. The man sitting there in the red shirt is named Victor, spelled W-I-K-T-O-R. Victor, who was 93, I think, 93. And he spoke to us about his experiences, what he saw. We listened to them. Renata is here. She's Polish, but she works for Yahad in Unum, and she was interviewing him along with Mikhail, right? And they were asking him questions. He would, of course, answer in Polish, and then they would translate for us to tell us exactly what he experienced. He talked some about the kinds of things that he experienced. One of the things he talked about was a mass killing that he observed behind, he called it a villa, behind a large building in Rabka. This is the building he was talking about. It was the headquarters for the Gestapo and the police, and it was basically a police academy. And behind this academy, in the woods, the Germans carried out a mass killing of the Jews of Rabka. There's a number of memorials there. This one was of interest. It's an entire family that was killed from Rabka. You can't see it very well, I'm sorry. I was hoping it would be a little easier to see. There's a little girl here being held by her father. Her father is Roman Kleinberg. He was a dentist in Rabka. The little girl there, her name is Anna. And Anna will come and talk to us later. She's now 89 years old. Talk about her experiences during the war, hiding with her mother and her sister. They survived the war. But the rest of her family there were exterminated and actually killed at this site, at this spot here. There's a kind of memorial that they've created out of the grave markers that the Nazis took from the graves. They didn't use them for anything. They just took them and destroyed them. Why do they do that? To eliminate the history of these people, to take their history away from them, and to say, you no longer count. You're not part of this story. So we have this was a collection of tombstones that was used there in that particular site. Again, please jump in at any point. The other thing I wanted to see, I don't see if you can see these, there's a bunch of slabs of concrete here, here, here. They were all through the wooded area there where we were. I wish we could get a good shot of them, but they were just scattered everywhere. These are the resting places of the Jews who were shot and killed there. Jewish tradition is you do not disturb the dead. So they're there, and they've never been, they will not be excavated out, exhumed, thank you. They will stay there because that's the Jewish tradition. And time again, we would go to these mass killing sites, and you would see these slabs to indicate here are where the bodies are of these people who were exterminated murdered. Let's get the notion right. Murdered by the Nazis. Was there anything else from Rabka that you can recall that we ought to mention?
Yes, but I want to get to that other side, so I'll come back to it. But Victor's story is interesting and problematic in some ways, and how Yahad and Unum manages that is very good. Okay,
we'll keep going. Yeah, there are some parts of the stories that he's telling that are problematic. Yeah. The next day we went to another village in the south of Poland called Tarnów. And in Tarnów, we visited the site of what was the Great Synagogue. What you have here in this picture is the Bima, which is the place where the Torah was read and where the rabbi would teach in the synagogue. It's the only thing that's left of the Great Synagogue. It was, once again, it was destroyed by the Nazis. And again, for the purpose of eliminating these people and their history. If you're going to kill these people, there's no reason to destroy their synagogues unless your goal is to erase these individuals and their entire history and culture. We also visited a square there where the deportation of the Jews took place. So they were detaining the Jews in Tarnów in a ghetto, as they often did, and then they were deporting the Jews from these places. And in this particular, there's a memorial there as a reminder that from this place, the Jews were deported to mainly Belzec, which was an extermination camp or a death camp. Elisa talked about there are death camps and then there are concentration camps. While we were there, we visited Auschwitz and Birkenau. It was actually a concentration camp. It was a work camp, basically, although it became a mass extermination center as well eventually, and became an extermination center for the Germans as well. But Belzec was an extermination camp, and most of the Jews at least from southern Poland, were sent to Belzec. They think that only 2 people ever survived who went to Belzec. Everyone else was killed. That's what it was. It was a killing center. And here, the Jews from Tarnów were sent off to Belzec. Again, okay. I don't want to take all the time. All right. We also visited a site that same day, the Buchnia Forest. Again, a site of mass killing. 800 children were taken to this site, Jewish children, and were murdered here in the Buchnia Forest. The monument here is interesting because it was put up by the Soviets. You'll recall that after the war, Poland was part of the old Soviet Union. And so the Soviets put this particular monument up, but it makes no mention of the fact that Jews were executed here. It says that citizens were executed here. It's part of the Soviet propaganda that they were not trying to commemorate or remember the Jews who were killed there. They were trying to remind the Soviets that the fascist Germans were their enemy and dangerous. And so we have this particular monument there, but it's not commemorating the death of the Jews, it's commemorating the death of citizens of the old Soviet Union. Behind the monument is, this is a picture taken while we were there. You'll notice these areas here that are kind of, there are low fences put around them. And again, these are the areas where the bodies, there's one here, there's one here, there's one over here, there's one there, and lots spread around. These are, again, the sites where the bodies of those who were murdered by the Nazis are located. I turn to you and say, anything you want to add?
It's just interesting that that narrative is still trying to be controlled through the Soviets. It's a human condition of wanting to control the narrative.
Okay. As we traveled through the area of southern Poland, they would, that is, the people from Jihad and Unum would suddenly pull off the side of the road. You know, we're just sort of going down the highway, and they would pull off the side of the road and say, okay, everybody out of the van. And they would take you to a site, oftentimes in the middle of nowhere, in the woods. This was one of those sites where they stopped and said, oh, okay, we're getting out, we're going to take a look at this. This was a site which memorializes a genocide of the Roma. The Jews not only the Nazis not only wanted to eliminate the Jews, they wanted to eliminate all undesirables. The Roma were considered by them to be undesirable. The Roma, the Sinti, the Jews, the communists, the socialists, the gay individuals, the Jehovah's Witness. Yeah, there's a slew of people. In this particular site, it's a memorial that was constructed by a Roma individual. And again, I go back to what Elisa was just talking about, the attempts to try to keep the narrative. In 2016, this site was torn apart by someone. It was destroyed. It was eventually put back together. But you can see that the narrative is still powerful, that the narrative is still out there, that the narrative is still being propagated by people. And it was a very... the second picture is here because you can see the highway behind us. It's just out in the middle of nowhere. It's this memorial to... And there were... at this particular spot, I think there were about 35 Roma who were killed, mainly children. I think there were 5 adults, but mainly children. But it's a memorial to all 500,000 Roma who were killed by the Germans during the Holocaust. Again, anything you want to add? Okay. I'm controlling the whole thing here. And please ask if you have any questions or want to ask anything or want to add anything. Please feel free to do that. The next day we went to a little village called, a medium-sized village or city called Miachov. And once again, we met with a witness, Joseph. You're up.
I did tell him I wanted to talk about this part because it was such a privilege to be able to be in on how they conduct these interviews. And they told us that if they're going to have an interview with the person who's a witness, it will always be at their house. I mean, they're so elderly. So the unit will come out to their house, but it will always take place in the back of the house or outside of the house, so as not to inconvenience anybody. And then it usually works this way, and Renata is on the right, and she and Michael on the left are both Polish. And the person being interviewed is Joseph, who is 99 years old in this picture. He is the oldest citizen of his village. And so Renata will ask a question in English, and then Michael on the left will translate it into Polish. And Joseph, of course, will answer in Polish as Renata is scribing and scribing and scribing his answers. And then she'll turn to us, and she will tell us what he said, as much as she can in his own words or summarizing to us. And so he is, he's got a story, and since I was scribing and scribing about what Renata was saying, I thought I would just bring some of his words back to you. He was 16 years old, and the Poles had to be out of their houses. The Germans would let them live in the attic or the basement. But he was 16 and not off to the war because he was considered essential. He's a watchmaker. So he remembers, and this is what he was recounting to us. He was going home from work one day at lunch, and before he was going back to work, before he got all the way back to work, he said, I was stopped by a German officer, and he stopped and he took me to the ghetto. And this is where the Jews were being kept in that village. And he remembers there were Jews in 2 rows, and they were made to lie down, and they were shot right there where they were lying. And he remembers it was in the wintertime with snow, and he's going to be pressed into service by the Nazis, then to transport and to bury these Jews. And he tells Renata and Michael, I thought I would faint. And so the guard rubbed my face with snow 3 times and told me because if I fainted, they would kill me. And he said it was just a real tragedy what happened there. And he described how they'd have to transport the bodies and how he was forced to bury those bodies, and told Renata, yes, I knew some of those people. And he managed to escape that evening, and there were other people that managed to escape and get back home. He also allowed that for 2 weeks, their family was trying to hide 2 Jews who had been neighbors in our house. And he said that was very, very difficult because 3 houses down was a person there from the Gestapo. And so he admitted that at one point we had to tell them they had to find another place. And so he said they went off to the countryside. And he said one of those 2 people did survive and come back here to tell my family that they had survived. And he went on for a long time, and as they told us later, he went back over some of those stories. But I really like the humanity in this picture. It's my favorite picture from the entire trip. Renata and Michael are giving so much respect and so much affirmation to him for telling the story. And obviously they did not take us to somebody who they were interviewing the first time. This was a relationship, and they had done several interviews already with Joseph. But you can see them both leaning in and smiling, and just a very opposite kind of reaction to human beings, that they were honoring him and telling his story. And he was amazing. Renata asked him, and how long ago did you retire? 2 years ago, he said. So 97 years old and still repairing clocks and watches. He says, I have a medal for it. It's in the house someplace. But a really amazing opportunity to see history done in this micro-history kind of way. And then adding to that interactive map of thousands of interviews that are now done.
Yeah, you can find Yahad's interview with him on that interactive map. They have posted, among other things, the interview. In fact, you can find all the people that we are talking about today, you can find their interviews on that interactive map if you go to the Krakow area. Yeah, that was it was a powerful, very powerful thing, sitting in his backyard. I mean, it was kind of bizarre. Here you are sitting in their backyard but listening to this incredible story, sharing of what he experienced during the occupation. Oop, I gotta be careful not to get too close. This is the Jewish cemetery in Miechov. Elisa was talking about the fact that he was pressed into service to transport the bodies from the killing site out to this particular cemetery, the Jewish cemetery. There was a pit that was dug in the back of the cemetery, and the bodies were just dumped into the pit. When they took us to this, it was one of those just indescribable juxtapositions. We're in the middle of a suburban neighborhood in the suburbs. It was a lovely little place that you would probably want to live. And at the end of the street is the old Jewish cemetery, which now looks like this. It's gone. The only thing that commemorates it are the plaques there in front. There are I think a few people after the war put up grave markers for family members who had died there, but otherwise there's nothing there. And again, at the back of this are the bodies of the Jews of Miechov. Well, and there was many refugees who were making their way to these small villages in an attempt to avoid being killed, and they were all exterminated, executed, killed in those places. It was haunting, and it was just so hard to fathom the two sites. That being in this neighborhood, which looks like any other suburban neighborhood, and then at the end of the street to find a site like this. Anything else?
Yeah, we were walking through waist-high grasses to be able to get back to this. Obviously, not a very well-traveled site.
Yeah, it was difficult to make your way into the cemetery. And I have to say, we're traveling through this beautiful countryside. Poland is beautiful. It's just hard to put together the beauty of the countryside that you're in with the horrors that had transpired. We stopped again by the side of the road. There's a marker here you can see. It used to be in the middle of the field because it's a site where 630 people were again murdered by the Germans. The farmer complained about the foot traffic being out in the middle of his field, and so they moved the marker back closer to the road so that it wouldn't bother his field. And you can see in the background the tree line back there. They took us around the field and into the woods back there to again another mass murder site. This is a marker that Yahad and Unum put up. They recently discovered this site by using ground-penetrating radar, I think. And I can't remember the numbers that they were talking about, but the numbers are staggering of the people who were murdered in this forest. It's now a recreational area used by the locals for recreation, which again is another sort of juxtaposition that's very hard to reconcile. I have here, we're going to try to do this, we have a video of our group visiting this site, and I hope we have sound, we'll see. because what you'll hear is utter silence. We were, I don't know how to describe it. We were just moved by being there. It was one of the most powerful moments for me in our entire trip, being on this site. No, didn't work. Let me see if we can use the track thing there to get onto the bottom. No, got to go back. Hold on. No. Sorry. Just wait. Sorry. No, it's not going to work. Where's the... Sorry, hold on.
I guess while they're working on it, I think it was beautiful, but just so silent, and you could just hear birds. And there is something about standing on the ground where these atrocities happened that was just really moving. The entire group agreed.
There's usually a little arrow that you can get. Okay, I don't think it's going to play, so.
Sorry about that.
It's unfortunate because it was we're standing there looking at these. There are 3 different sites where they have identified. It was identified in 2018. That's how recently it was discovered. And there's 3 areas there in the woods. And we're standing there and people are going by on segways a few feet from where we're standing and oblivious to what was there. It was just so hard to understand. We're going to move on. We left that particular site and went to a village called Jałaszutza. That's how you would pronounce that. The L there, well, it looks like an L with a little line through it, is pronounced like a W. So their W's are pronounced like a V. The L is with a line through it is pronounced like a W. So it's Jałaszutza. The interesting thing about this particular village is that 90% of the village was Jewish before the war. No Jews live there today. This, again, was the synagogue there. It must have been a beautiful building at one time. It's now, of course, been destroyed. The roof is gone. It's occupied by birds right now. And then on the outskirts of the town, there's by the old Jewish cemetery, which of course is gone, is a marker which had not been cared for. We did a little bit of work on cleaning it up, etc. But identifies the fact that Jews were both deported from here as well as killed here. I think there was something like 6,000 Jews deported from Jałaszutza in 1942 to Balzac. The next day we traveled to the city of Auschwitz. And Auschwitz is the city where Auschwitz and Birkenau are located. Although we didn't go that day, we came back on a second day to look through Auschwitz-Birkenau. Instead, we toured Auschwitz. This was one of the synagogues there, was made into a munitions depot by the Germans during the war, and then it was a warehouse for carpet under the Soviets. It was eventually returned to the Jewish community and it's been restored as a synagogue, and sometimes services are held there. This building here is the Jewish museum that's there. in Ashvisum. Right now, it's believed that only one Jew lives in Ashvisum. She was a transport from Israel. She was born and raised in Israel, went to live there. Her name is Hila Weiss Gut. She took us around the city and showed us the various Jewish sites there in Ashvisum. She lives there with her Polish husband, and they run this particular museum. After the war, one of the former residents came back. His house was right behind here. His name was Simon Kluger. He lived there until 2000 when he died. When he died, there were not enough Jews in the town to, you need, for a minyan, for a gathering for worship, you need 10 adult Jews. There were not 10 adult Jews. So a rabbi was able to contact a Jewish group that had just left Auschwitz, persuaded them to come back so that they could hold a funeral, leviha, for him. Otherwise, there weren't enough Jews in the town to hold such a thing. Inside the museum, there was a picture that I took and wanted to show you today because this little boy here, this is a family from Ashvisum. This little boy here is Wolf Blitzer from CNN. And his family lived in Ashvisum, and he lived in Ashvisum. And his picture, I don't know if you can recognize him without his beard, but there you are. He was from Ashvisum. As we toured through the village, we ran across what's called a Stolperstein, which is a little brass plate. It's embedded in the pavement to commemorate, to recognize Holocaust victims. This one is Francesca Haberfeld. The Haberfeld family ran one of the successful businesses, a Jewish family obviously, but a successful business in Ashvisum. It was a distillery. Today, that distillery is a Hampton Inn. Yes? They have those in Rome too. Yes, if you go to the yes, we saw that too. If you go to the Jewish ghetto in Rome, there's a number of them. Yeah, exactly.
They put them on the ground as to actually stub your toe. That's some of the meaning. So that even as you're walking through this life, you're remembering what happened. Yeah.
And they commemorate the site. So this was right in front of the Hampton Inn in Ashvisum. We also went to the cemetery, the Jewish cemetery, which again was destroyed by the Nazis. You can see the bits of grave markers that they've been able to collect and put back together. This looks like it was always there. It was not. They have no idea where the bodies that go with these markers are. They simply have brought them back and tried to restore what they can. And this thing over here is once again a collection of grave markers that were brought back in and simply put there to remind people this is where the Jewish cemetery was in Ashvisum. One of the things that impressed me while we were in Ashvisum is we went to the site of the Great Temple there. There was about 60% of the population in Ashvisum, which was about 17,000 at the time. So about 8,000 Jews lived in the city of Ashvisum, and they had a massive temple there. They had put on the ground sort of the outline of where the temple stood. And of course, it's gone now. There's just nothing there at all, nothing. And after the war, a young boy remembered that he saw them burying, before the temple was destroyed, burying these artifacts. So this group from a Jewish, from a university in Poland looked and looked and looked, and they finally did find it, and most of the artifacts can be found in the Jewish museum that I showed you a little earlier, and we saw many of those. We're running out of time here, I understand. There is one picture. We decided not to talk about Auschwitz because so much has already been said and done about Auschwitz, but I wanted to show one picture. Yad Vashem from Israel has put a new exhibit there in one of the barracks. These were the barracks. It's a picture of the barracks there in Auschwitz. And they've put up this particular exhibit. What you have here is a list of names of Jews who were exterminated during the Holocaust. In these books, there are 4 million names listed. You can see here, it's just name after name and where they were from. That's it. 4 million. It's estimated that the Germans killed 12 million people during the Holocaust. So this is a third. It just sort of gives you a sense of the magnitude of what we were talking about here in terms of the killing. These were just page after page after page after page after page of names of those who had been exterminated by the Germans during the Holocaust. A very powerful reminder. We went one day to Blashow, which was the concentration camp outside of Krakow. Again, if you've seen Schindler's List, the people from Schindler's factory were taken from this particular place, from Blashow. And you'll recall from the film, the commandant, Alman Gert, shooting people from his villa. Well, this is actually the villa today. Steven Spielberg took some artistic license. You really couldn't shoot people, at least from the balcony of this, but he did in the mornings go out and shoot various of the Jews who were in Blashow. This, once again, was a monument on the site constructed by the Soviets. And it's called the Monument Against Fascism. And it's to the memory of the martyrs killed here by the German fascists between 1943 and 1945. Once again, it's meant to project their own narrative and their hatred of the fascists, the Germans, but not really to commemorate the Jews who were there. I'm going to take one more second, if you'll allow us. The last village that we visited was a place called Novi Targ, and Carolina Pons was our guide through it. She has researched and written extensively about Novi Targ, and used to live there, but was forced to leave because of threats to her family by the Poles who lived there. Her work had been published in a book. The Polish government had passed laws saying you were not allowed to denigrate Poles or say anything negative about Polish survivors of World War II. So the people who edited the book were put on trial for publishing this book with her stories about Novi Targ in it. They were initially found guilty. On appeal, they were exonerated. But again, I think what's important here for us to understand is there's an attempt to project a particular narrative and to make that narrative work, to make the facts fit the narrative rather than the narrative fit the facts. And today, we have states that are passing laws, including the state of Ohio, saying you cannot teach these things, or you must teach these things. In 2021, that trial took place. More recently than that, Ohio has passed laws basically trying to do exactly the same kind of thing. We need to be very afraid of what's going on in our country and even in our state. Sorry, I'm starting to preach now. But I think it's very dangerous. And it all goes back to this idea of creating a narrative and doing whatever we can to make that narrative, make the facts fit that, make the fact fit the narrative. You have the last word.
I think it's a great thing to be able to have a high school class, though, where 16, 17, and 18-year-olds are very receptive to what was this story. And to being able to start to see what then do they do when they're coming up against evil or injustice, even on a small scale. It's a good audience to be able to reach. Yeah.
Let's take just a moment to have a word of prayer before we leave. God, we know that you are a God who controls all things. And even though it seems at times that evil prevails, in the end, evil will not prevail. And that you have called upon us to do what we can to make the world good and better. May we be faithful servants of yours. May we take on the mind of Christ in our lives and all that we do and say. And we pray these things in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you so much. Sorry we went over.
Are you on next week or are you done?
I am done. Next week, Dr. Case is going to be... Do you want to advertise?
Show up and see.
Okay.